Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session number 24 of Season 7, and tonight we are going to discuss Episode 9 of Season 7, which means we are officially past the time of joy and preparation, and the sorrow has begun. The sorrow, though not the fighting, has begun. Fighting won't begin until episode 10, but episode 9 is when the sadness begins, as of course this is going to be, this episode is called The Death of Laughter. This is the plague in Dor-lómin, of course. So, well, more than just the plague in Dor-lómin happens, but this is the episode in which that happens. So, I am joined, as usual, by Marie Prosser and, whoever else is there, Nick Palazzo. I'm not actually forgetting your name. I'm just like, I got out of my rhythm there, and I was like,
I wasn't here for a session, so
it's true. And I've forgotten you already. See, I forget things really quickly, right? So I forget who you are if you miss a time. Like, clearly, how can anyone
that was
expect
exactly
otherwise?
what I told my wife this very evening.
Anyway, so but Nick, we are glad to have you back. I hope you're feeling better. I know you had COVID before, right?
Yeah. I mean, lingering cough, but
Right.
nothing. That's just my throat hating me forever. So
Yeah, understood. That happens. All right, and Dave's not able to make it tonight but he is not, in fact, on fire, and should be back, we hope, soon. And Alana's joining us remotely here tonight, so there we go. Yes, I will be meeting with Ilana and Phil and all of our friends down in Australia before our next session. So, all right. Hang on, blew right past my announcements where I was going to emphasize Osmoot, which is next week, January 24th to 26th, down in Melbourne, Australia. So we are getting close now to Osmoot. Very excited to see everybody down there. So I'll be traveling down to Australia. Always such a wonderful time. And then we have back into America for our regional moots in February. Sunshine Moot down in Florida. The 15th SoCal Moot down in Carlsbad, California, near San Diego. And then April in Texas, in Houston, and May 31st, Mountain Moot in Denver. And in between, on April 26th, Willow Moot in Belgium. So back over to Europe again. That is the spring schedule that we are looking forward to. And Mythmoot, the call for presentations has been released for Mythmoot. So you can, if you go to signumuniversity.org and find our Mythmoot page in our events, you can see our call for presentations. And Mythmoot, of course, will be on the 19th to the 22nd of June down in Leesburg, Virginia, as usual. All right. I'm going to come back to the map because I'm going to have map-related questions, as well as like Thingol-related questions. So we're talking about we're just an outline this week. We don't have a full script for episode 9. We're going to talk through the episode, and you guys can walk me through the things that you guys are planning. Do want to emphasize that casting nominations for season 7 are still in progress. So we would love to hear people's nominations for, especially the human characters. An elf or two, Gwyndor, right? We're doing Gwyndor?
Gwyndor and Finduilas.
And Finduilas, yeah.
Yeah, the human characters, like you said, couple of dwarves. Any
Right.
dwarf suggestions would be great.
Any dwarf suggestions, right. Yep. Yeah. So so that will be good. All right. So the A plot of episode 9 is the planning of the attack on Dorthonion, essentially, right? And I know it's kind of the beginning of it because they're planning the dragon plan, but like no fighting actually happens. Do they move out? They're deployed towards Dorthonion before the end of this episode, kind of?
Kind of at the end, yes,
Okay.
but yeah, definitely no fighting, and they're not in Dorthonion yet.
Right. So it's still mostly the end of episode 8, we got Ulfang meeting with folks. So we got a few sessions, right, where he was able to meet Mithros, and he was able to begin to try to wrap his head around the whole Beleriand experience, right, there near the end of episode 8. But now we really see him as part of, so first of all, so I have to make a confession, and that is, somehow in my head, like, I found this concept odd. In my head, I was imagining vaguely, but it was very vague. So it's not like I had a specific plan that was contrary to this. But I was vaguely imagining the Easterlings coming in like slightly more last minute. Like what we got a glimpse of in episode 8, and what I was kind of forced more fully to imagine here in episode 9. The idea of like a big Ulfang sitting around like a big old strategy planning table with Mithros and and the other Feanorians and the dwarves and everybody else. Like it's not even something. The more I thought of when I processed a little bit more, the mere so my experience, at first I was just like, this feels weird to me. And I'm like, why does this feel weird? And then I realized, okay, it's because I never really imagined Ulfang doing this. I never really imagined the Easterlings. I kind of imagined them coming in, not exactly in the middle of things, but closer to the middle of things. Like as if instead of him coming and like being part of HQ at Himring, I was kind of imagining them coming over the mountains and like emissaries having to be sent back and forth and some coordination being achieved, but just sort of seeing like there's Ulfang and Mithros and Galadriel and Curufin and Azekal and everybody all sitting around planning stuff. It just hadn't really been in my head, and I don't think there's nothing wrong with it. But
Well,
it's been strange to me.
There was one reason to not do it this way,
Mm-hmm.
and to keep them separate, and that is we don't want anyone to figure out what Uldor is up to.
Right.
So if Uldor doesn't really interact with anybody,
Right.
then that's easier to keep that a surprise.
Right.
And not make everyone in the room look real dumb for not having noticed that he was not really buying into all of this.
Right.
So we solved that by putting Ulfang in the room and not his sons.
And not his sons, right? Like if
Yeah.
if Uldor is just marginalized so that nobody really interacts with him much at all except for his father grudgingly or whatever. But yeah, Alana, I agree. So Alana says, I think in our story, the eucatastrophe of the Easterlings arriving is in response to the failure of getting Nargothrond and Doriath to commit in the summit episodes. Right. The sense of eucatastrophe that the Easterlings form is like a bigger picture. It's not a sudden sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. And again, if the betrayal is gonna matter to us, we have to have been convinced that these people were on their side. Like we had to let the audience see this play out enough that they're like, oh, okay, this is where it's going, this is how it's gonna work.
Yeah.
And there can't be that, well, they just got here and they don't know anybody, how's this gonna happen? Like we had to get them past that point somehow. So this episode,
I think
everyone's
like
sitting
it.
around in more meetings is how
Right.
we did that.
I think I like it, all things considered. It certainly does increase the sense of betrayal if they are part of the core plan from the start, and they not only don't pan out, they turn out to betray them instead of assist them, or at least many of them. It certainly is a greater disaster. And I will say, like, when I think over the text and try to think, and this is so often the case, and by the way, this exercise I'm describing is one I so wish more people did. That is, I had the impulse that said like, but that's not how it is in the text, right? And then I actually sat down and said, well, what in the text makes me think that? Like, why do I have that feeling that this doesn't match the text? And I went back and I'm like, no, there's nothing in the text that matches my own picture of this. In fact, there's every implication in the text that the Easterlings and the Feanorians are in fact working quite closely together in preparation for the battle. Like that's actually, so I don't even know why I was not thinking that way originally. It's certainly not because it's actually like the text says to the contrary.
I mean, all 2 lines of the text.
I know, exactly. So, right.
From that viewpoint, like, not a big deal.
No, it's the,
as far as which details are or are not included, and not everything in our story is going to match exactly.
Of course, yeah,
those 1 or 2 lines, because we're not. Those lines are written from someone who knows that these guys betray them.
Right. Exactly.
Like, everything. It's the Silmarillion is history, right?
Yes.
It's written after the fact. So we're trying to introduce it as if you don't know that's
exactly.
What's gonna happen.
Exactly.
So it's a different way of telling the story.
Yeah. The experience that we're wanting our audience to have is different from the one that the Silmarillion is trying to have, is expecting its audience to have. Yes.
Right. Like how we see the tragedy of the betrayal is going to be from the other way around.
Right.
Of we have to convince them that Ulfang would have been this really great ally.
Right.
And then we need to murder him.
And to do that, we need to show them fighting alongside each other.
Yes.
So having them being involved in the Dorthonion campaign, which we brilliantly decided to have a separate thing that we were going to do.
Absolutely.
Separate from the battle proper, gives us the opportunity to have our cake and eat it too, where we get to see the counterfactual. We get to see Ulfang fighting alongside the elves before the Easterlings inevitably betray them.
Right, before the sudden and inevitable betrayal. Yes. Yes, agreed. So now, of course, there's one of the elements of discussing an episode that we only have an outline instead of in script is it's most of the the progress from point A to point B is merely to be imagined. How do you see Ulfang and his relationship? So one element that that was emphasized in episode 8 and comes back again in episode 9 is Ulfang just struggling with like that. Now he lives in fantasy world, right? Elves and dragons and whatnot, right? And how he's dealing with, first of all, I mean, yes, there are elves, like he's reconciled himself to that, right? But he's still struggling with the dragon and everything. I'm interested to hear more about how, like, are there going to be sort of stages, breakthroughs? How do we imagine Ulfang kind of processing these things? I know there was a reference, for instance, in the outline to him struggling with the idea of the longevity of the elves, how he will hear references to them talking about things that happened hundreds of years ago. And so what kind of experience do we, and is there going to be any kind of a gradient? Are we giving gradient in experience? That is, are we going to also show some Easterlings who are more resistant and Ulfang who's less? Like, how are we going to show the processing of the, because it is still, it's a rather large leap, right? It's one thing to say, hey, so I've met these elves and their stuff's amazing, and he can admire them and what they do and what they've built and their armor and weapons and fortresses and all this stuff. Like, there's a lot to be impressed by and a lot of reasons for him to feel like, wow, like I have entered into a different world where people are on a whole different level than what I'm used to. But at the same time, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And how do we, how much are we emphasizing that? How does he get over that? How do we see that happen? All that kind of thing.
Right. That's the, different world aspect of it is something we wanted to experience through All Things Eyes, because he's from a human culture that hasn't had much interaction with elves or anything like that. So entering Beleriand and working closely with elves, this is different for him, and he has to get his bearings there. So it doesn't feel normal to him. And our audience has gotten used to the elves over time.
Right.
So that feels more normal to them. So he is feeling an outsider and like wrong-footed by all of this. And he's not going to like get over it. Like he's not going to just be like, elves, that's not like where his trajectory is going. But the question is that a barrier to him trusting these people, working with them, being an ally to them?
Right.
And that's what he needs to kind of figure out is, all right, this is different. I wasn't quite expecting this.
Right.
And he wasn't a big fan of Galadriel being very elfy back home.
Right. Right.
Like when she did her elf stuff, he was not cool with that.
Yeah.
So now, if he's working with a whole bunch of them, like how comfortable can he be with accepting that to the point of trust?
Yeah, because it's a big shift from I'm in my home kingdom and there is a sorceress among us, right? To now all of a sudden I'm either the only sane person in the loony asylum or I'm like at the kids table and it's like there are all kinds of different ways in which he would experience it. And there's nothing even like the sorceress in the kingdom thing that he, normal has been shifted completely.
So one thing is that he's used to being the most competent person in the room pretty consistently.
Right.
Especially when you were dealing in his field of expertise.
Right.
Now he is one of the most competent people in the room.
Right.
And so it would be very easy for him to get a sense of being at the kiddies table, as you say. It puts me in mind of the discussions that we had around the Baorians living in Nargothrond, and how could any of them ever, how could their greatest craftspeople ever even match apprentices serving under elvish craftsmen?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. On the other hand, he has an army with a lot of experience.
Yes.
Because his army has been used to conquer all the neighboring kingdoms throughout his entire life.
Right. Right.
So his army was not just standing around for show at any point. It was a very practical army. And as amazing as these elves and dwarves are, it's been a while since the last war here.
It's true.
Like 18, 20 years.
Yeah.
So all the humans haven't really seen a real war.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I'm imagining, Ulfang talking to like a member of the Feanorian militia or something, right? Be like, oh yeah, I'm just a farmer, like I'm not in the army. I only volunteer in times of crisis. So I only have about 175 years of military experience, Okay. Yeah. So one of the like kind of taking a couple steps back, one of the reasons that it struck me that this was a really important thing is that this picks up on, we started this season in Gondolin, right?
Yeah.
And what happens when human culture meets elf culture was the very first movement of this season. And it is an interesting, the Nirnaeth is a really interesting, this whole era is sort of an interesting cultural moment, right? We had, Nick, as you were talking about the Nargothrond moment, like the first moment of kind of cultural contact between humans and elves, and then we had the Ladros development, and we had Hador, right, coming in, and we had the Haleth situation. So we've already been working with what happens when these two cultures come in contact with each other. But we have, it seems, a really clear parallel that has emerged, even though we didn't exactly plan it that way, between Hurin and Dor-lómin and Ulfang and his army, right? We have two different human leaders who are leading autonomous human quasi-autonomous human societies, who are related to the elves. But I mean, obviously, Hurin's in a totally different situation, but that's the point, right? Here, on the one hand, we have a very strong human warrior, good human leader of other humans, who is the lord of his people. But he has grown up within this context of connection to the elves and orientation, cultural orientation, to working with the elves, even though they do keep separate. It's one of the things that's been really interesting to me, is the way in which, over the course, especially of this season, we have established though last season as well, to some extent, the relationship between Dor-lómin and Fingon, basically. How there's, it's accepted. There's, we know Hurin is going to respond when Fingon comes and calls him to arms. And yet, although we know they're going to say yes, we know how that works. But still, like, they're still separate. It's still an autonomous culture. And we've spent a lot of time there among those people. So we've got like this one society which has more or less made peace with living among the elves and kind of understanding the role of human society and the differences. And of course, now still having Hurin and Huor with the benefit of their Gondolin experience, right? And the way that this has continued, even just in the previous episode, with Huor being like, is it okay to get married in time of war? And Hurin being like, yeah, you're a human, dumbo. Of course you're going to get married in the time of war, right? But anyway, yeah. So, so we've got, but then Ulfang and his people are almost like a kind of foil for that on the other side, like on the other side of the continent there. And so it seems to me that it's important for us to kind of think about that and think about how those two things correspond, how we can show, kind of like we were within the microcosm of episode 1, right? The different sorts of human experiences, the different challenges, both challenges and benefits, right? Handir and Huor being the two extremes, right? Of how, humans can be, sort of like elevated and sort of brought up to the elves like Huor was, or can just, be
stifled.
Stifled, yeah, exactly. And with Ulfang, it's not obvious which camp what direction he's going to go. He could go either way. I mean, he could, conceivably, you could see him becoming not the same, like not becoming a scholar like Huor, but you could see him becoming a fanboy like Huor. You could easily imagine Ulfang being like, okay, like, I have met my new heroes, right? Like this, like, I want to like stay here with Himring and learn from Maedhros for like the rest of my life. This is incredible. Like, one could imagine that, right? One could imagine him taking the Handir direction and being like, this is horrible. Like, this is, I want to go back to where I had some self-respect, right? And where, where people used to take me seriously, or
I feel
whatever.
Like that's certainly more like the character that we've developed for certain. Except our guy is, I would say, significantly more pragmatic than Handir is.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like, again, it's not that he is going to have the circumstances are totally different. But again, I feel like we need to think about how these two things correspond to each other. And that's why this particular issue with how does Ulfang, especially since we have this whole like comparatively peaceful episode in which to emphasize like this is the moment, right? This is the moment to show how Ulfang is going to, especially since he's going to get murdered soon. This is the moment to show how Ulfang is going to adjust and give us at the very least that sort of tantalizing what if, right? With Ulfang. Yeah.
And there's certainly, I really like because you brought up the differences between the Easterlings and Dor-lómin.
Yeah. There's
certainly a juxtaposition between Hurin and Ulfang.
Yeah.
Who are, I mean, there's nearly a generation between them, but they do have a lot of similarities to them. They're both fathers. They're both war leaders. Both.
You don't have the whole like new young leader trying to figure it out situation with Ulfang that you do with Hurin. So the parallels are limited by that, certainly.
For sure.
But yeah.
But the fact that Hurin is something of a realist in comparison to say Hur. He's not a pessimist. Right. He's not a dewy-eyed optimist.
He's not a dreamer. Hurin
right.
Yeah.
There was a time I would say that he probably dreamt of glory on the battlefield as a young man, but I don't think that that's where he is at this time.
The death of his father fixed that, I think.
Yeah. I think he's much closer to Ulfang is at this point. And I think it was David Roberts made the point of that there is certainly a comparison to be drawn between who's the better father between the two of them.
Yes.
And
for sure.
I don't think that that's even a close question.
No.
No. I mean, Hurin might not be a perfect father, but Ulfang is a bad father.
Yes, exactly.
Like not a bad person, but just really bad at being a father.
Bad at parenting, yes.
Both effective military leaders who are loved by their troops, Alana points out, which, I would say.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And that's where Ulfang's throughway is that he's there as a military leader. He's interested in this campaign, and he wants it to succeed. And so what do I think about these elves relates back to that question of, do I think their campaign will succeed?
Right.
So for him, it's really a matter of, do I trust what they're telling me? And do I trust their evaluation of the situation?
Yeah.
And by the end of this episode, he's basically like, I think this is all good. I think this is going to work. I'm on board. And at the beginning of the episode, he was not there. So that's his growth of his level of trust.
It's his level of trust. So when you say he's not on board, like, what exactly is he not on board with?
Well, if he doesn't know what a dragon is, it's really hard to determine how difficult is it to fight this dragon? What means are necessary? Like, what do you have to do to succeed? And all he's been told is, no one's ever killed a dragon before. He's like, well, then how are we going to do this? And they're like, we have new tools. We have, like, we're going to do it. We've got a new plan. And he's like, okay. But since he's never seen a dragon, how is he supposed to evaluate if they're right? If they're like, we can totally do this thing.
Right.
And he's like, is this going to be good like they say, or is this going to be a total disaster that I'm getting drawn into? So that doubt of, I don't know what you're talking about, and therefore I can't tell if you're right, he's got to fall back on what he does know to evaluate them. And so that's why he needs to have conversations with Azaghal, conversations with Mithras, to get to a point of saying, well, from what I do understand, I trust this person's judgment. And if I trust this person's judgment and they can do things that my army can't do, then this plan they've come up with, it's probably a good plan.
Well, also, by allowing him to have input that makes a difference, and in fact carries, it impacts the course of the battle. Like even though he himself dies before the near knife proper takes place, his insight impacts the the campaign in Dorthonion, even though he's not even physically there, because he winds up making the suggestion to have the dwarves pull the mountaineering commando team. Once he talks to Azaghal, as you say, Marie, and gains information about, like, who are these guys, what are these guys capable of,
right,
and winds up having insights that other people hadn't thought of yet.
One thing that surprised me a little bit was that there was comparatively little discussion of what his troops would actually do. I mean, I understood there was the reference to that he's gonna hit Ladros, and by attacking the orcs in Ladros, he was going to enable them to use
staging area.
For Ladros as a staging area, which makes, of course, a great deal of sense. But I was just thinking, the strategy discussion, so far as I could see, that he was in on in this episode is primarily about the dragon plan, which obviously is the first step, and so everybody's thinking about that, and all of the sort of elaborate preparation has gone into that. But surely the greatest role that Ulfang and his army are going to be playing is going to be on Falglyth afterwards.
Yes.
Right?
It is.
Yeah. Anyway, so I just kind of I was surprised there wasn't more discussion, like that he wasn't pushing discussion to be like, okay, so let's talk about tell me your battle plan, right? Not just the dragon plan, which, like, in several ways is like it's outside of his expertise, in that he doesn't even really, again, as we've been saying, he doesn't really understand what we're talking about. But also, he's not directly involved in that either, right? But he is going to be directly involved, and may have, certainly would have, obviously has interest in understanding how his army is meant to be deployed as part of the larger battle. Now, obviously, we don't have to show him having all of these conversations. Like, we can sort of,
imply that they happen.
But I was surprised that, of all the planning sessions he's in, he's focused on, like, the stuff which is in a sense least relevant to him in that way.
So one of the things is that we didn't want to distract too much from the plot of what we're doing right now, right? But also we have part of it, like, some of that stuff is going to come out in episode 10, some of it's going to come out in episode 11. So we are going to get to that. This is more just focused on where we're at.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Ilana was saying, I think in the dramatization of the episode, there would also be opportunities for Ulfang to do some kind of soldiering with Noldor and dwarves, so we can see his respect emerging from that, and not just from talk with them.
Right.
Yeah, they're so in episode 10, there's a joint action where they clear Ladros, essentially, and so I think, like, the whole first act, they're with the Easterlings are kind of alongside them, so we definitely get to at least see them involved.
But as far as, what are these characters doing when they're standing around talking? If the outline does not specify, it does not mean that they are literally just standing
around
absolutely
talking.
Nothing and having a conversation.
Yes.
So there is room for the scriptwriter to be creating the scenarios around which these conversations develop.
Right.
They're not all just sitting in meetings.
Like a confrontation between Captain America and Iron Man is much more interesting while the conversation is taking place around them both splitting wood.
Right. Exactly. Rather than sitting in a,
Yes.
having meetings.
Yeah.
Yes.
You get to see, Captain America rip a log of wood apart
Yes.
with his bare hands.
That is a very
to
fun part of it.
accentuate the point.
Yes. Yes. Right. Agreed. So,
So yes, they can be involved in not just talking about planning, but the preparations that go into that,
Mhm.
and therefore whatever activities are going on, that he would be there, so he could be part of them.
Yeah.
now the, let's talk about the baby dragons, for a bit. Now, we've introduced the baby dragons in large part because we need there to be baby dragons eventually.
Yes.
Right. But there's also a sort of a kind of urgency that lends as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that is the incident that makes this episode feel like there's a deadline.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way that we have not really seen any deadlines all season. Like,
yes.
These are elves planning a war. They're totally going to fight the war someday, you guys. Maybe even in this lifetime.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But this discovery is a new piece of information, and it's the first new piece of information that involves the villains.
Right.
So, like, the arrival of the Easterlings was new information. The involvement of the dwarves is new information. But this is something the villains are doing, and it's a problem that
Right.
needs to be addressed.
I feel compelled to point out that while we keep saying baby dragons and have continuously done so, we mean dragons of around the same age Glaurung was when he took his little
field
escapade.
trip. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, Glaurung's little adventure.
Yes.
So young dragons would be more appropriate than
Right.
baby at this point, because we did introduce them as baby dragons previously, so they
Right.
got a little older. But dragons do grow very slowly, and
Right.
these dragons aren't that old. It's only been 20 years, so these are young dragons.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. But I wanted to make sure
They're not hatchlings now.
right. that it's not surprising, in the next episode when, they're not wormlings,
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, these are more substantial. But yeah, so
These are actually, Marie, you are right on the money by using the term young dragons. I think
that is exactly the age class that they're
Yes.
that they're in.
Yes. You see, Marie, in Dungeons and Dragons, dragons are classified as wormlings, young dragons, adult dragons, and ancient dragons.
Yeah.
Right?
I was not aware of this.
Yes. And so young dragons are precisely what they are. I think they're still large, but young dragons, I believe, are well, most of them. I think silver dragons are generally small.
Young dragons are large, and adult dragons are huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Size classes is another.
Size classes is another thing. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Ancient dragons are gargantuan, but yeah. Right. And of course, like so many things in Dungeons and Dragons, this has been explicitly inspired by Tolkien and Smaug's language in describing himself and how he has grown stronger as he has aged.
Yes.
Yeah. That the conversation with Bilbo is clearly the root of the age classes of dragons, and the way they're described, especially in the first edition. It is such a fun exercise, by the way, flipping through the first edition monster manual, which is there's so much just
bonkers.
I have no idea how they got away with that.
Yes.
I mean, it is so ripped straight off from
it's
Tolkien.
super
It's
copyright. I mean,
unbelievable.
like halflings were hobbits still.
Yes.
I mean, it's just,
yeah, like the trademark infringement, the plagiarism, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll take it.
They didn't think they were going to sell that many. They didn't know.
Yes, they had no idea. Yeah. So now, David, I agree with you. One could hardly classify Glaurung as ancient by any standard in at this stage, right, where we are right now.
Yeah. He's several hundred years old.
Yeah, exactly.
And Galakon the Black fits the description.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, there's a whole other class of dragons called catastrophic dragons, and I would definitely put in Galakon the Black in that category.
That's all new.
He sounds like a catastrophe, but he's not going to be that old though, because there's no winged dragons yet.
Right. That's the catastrophe.
Right, and that catastrophe is going to happen in less than 100 years from this point.
Yeah.
Well, less than 125 years from this point.
I mean, who knows how wings get added to dragons, if they're added like after the fact,
surgically, or
right, like because it's possible that
Galakon
the Black is
situation.
at the Near Ninth. It is not impossible.
But there's no winged dragons at the Near Ninth.
I understand that.
Unless he's not gotten his wings yet, is what you're saying.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
The
big giant bell hasn't rung yet.
Right.
The dragon didn't get his wings.
Every time a gong rings, a dragon gets his wings.
Oh my.
Get me! I'm giving out wings.
Yeah. But that's actually interesting. I hadn't thought about this.
That's probably good.
No, I hadn't thought about, like, because I, was thinking, obviously the revelation of the winged dragons is not, we're not close to that, right? We're going to not get there for a long time, but we're going to be speeding up a lot. Like, chronologically, there's not that much time between now and the War of Wrath.
Right. We're in the year 471 right now. And the War of Wrath is going to happen by 590 at the latest.
So we don't have much time to grow huge new dragons between now and then. Like, they almost have to be coming very soon, if not now, right? I mean, if
having these dragons get from baby to big enough to be a problem in 20 years suggests that we do in fact have time for multiple generations of dragons before we get to Ancalagon.
Right, but there's problems, and then there's problems. What I'm thinking about is the wing question, right? Because if Morgoth is going to develop winged dragons through some kind of program of crossbreeding or however this happens, right? Some sort of genetic alteration, right? There's not much time for that.
Right.
If there's going to be more of a
magic
surgical magical intervention, there's plenty of time. I agree.
Magical application of bat stem cells to existing live dragons.
I don't think that does what you want it to do.
I don't think so either.
But, Island of Dr. Moreau does not actually work either on any level. That was very crazy.
You don't think we can give them a serum and, like, put a lot of electricity in and they'll
super soldier serum
emerge with wings? Like
super dragon serum?
Yeah, super dragon serum? Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I
don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Then they ended up with extra heads because it's Hydra.
Right, exactly. So anyway,
okay.
Like I said, it never even occurred to me that sooner rather than later might be good to be thinking about the wing issue and how exactly that happens. In some ways,
we want the Wind Dragons by Gondolin, the Fall of Gondolin, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's our deadline. We don't have to show how.
Yeah, of course.
No, we don't.
Magic happens.
We don't.
The magic happened.
The magic happens.
That's what the kids are calling it these days.
However you put these wings on these dragons.
Yeah. I think. See, I don't. There's something. I'm trying to think of any examples of that kind of like, poof, now you have wings kind of magic happening, you know, like, especially among the bad guys. Do we ever see that kind of thing? I mean,
No, we have shapeshifters, and that's about it.
Shapeshifters.
So Thingol can go from having wings to no wings, but
right. We have
that's a shapeshifting thing.
So the bad guys accomplish things by shape-shifting beings or by possessing already existing creatures with evil spirits.
Sure.
Or by breeding programs like the Urukai.
Right.
So the inhabiting existing creatures doesn't just, however, take over the existing body. Like a thing happens. Like that's how you wind up with like werewolves, like Sir no longer appearing in this show. That
yes,
that guy.
Dor-lómin.
Yeah,
yes.
that guy.
Yeah.
That spirit was embodied in an existing wolf and then warped it and mutated it.
Yes.
Right? So presumably something on that order has happened with Glaurung.
But
well, no, because he seems to have been born this way.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, aren't dragons already that basically?
Right.
So what do you have to get a bigger, badder spirit to splice in with spirit number one?
So if I recall correctly, we spent a good deal of time trying to figure out
how
what
dragons
Glaurung,
were
in
made
fact, is and where he came from. And we did all of that, and then we're like, or, you know what we could do is at the end of season 4, a dragon appears! And that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah, we didn't actually make the decision.
Well, we didn't actually show anything on screen because we wanted him to be a surprise, and there was no way to show what Morgoth did and then have it still be a surprise.
Right. But what he did seems to be... So it seems likely...
We had chosen ancient spirit somehow inhabiting.
Monstrous creature probably developed through a breeding program.
Probably, yeah.
Like some kind of monstrous, vaguely sort of reptilian, and then the spirit enters into it, and there you've got Glaurung.
So not exactly an incarnate being the way the Balrogs are.
Yes, right, exactly. Not just the incarnation of a being. But see, I think that seems to me to sort of rule out the idea, unless...
We also did not answer the question of how Glaurung ended up with these baby dragons.
Right. Where is there a mommy dragon out
where
there?
Mommy dragon went, yeah.
Well,
yeah,
and
is
honestly,
there another parent
it seems like the Ungoliant situation, frankly.
Yeah.
Like
it could. Like, yeah.
Who was
Glaurung
Ungoliant's baby
Dorthonion.
daddy, and where did he come from? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, clearly afterwards she ate him because it's Ungoliant. But
obviously. Right. Yeah.
And he's not around anymore.
Right. Exactly. He's not a long-term problem, but he's a short-term problem. Right. Like so, I mean, it just, it's a pretty hand-wavy moment, honestly. Right. When Tolkien's like, there was another giant spider for reasons, and Ungoliant mated with him. Right. Yeah. It's like, okay. Yeah.
Well, I think, again, with how much of this needs to make sense, if you have a creature like Ungoliant who eats light and spews darkness and has an insatiable hunger,
life finds a way. Do you
really need a male and a female?
Love conquers all. Yeah.
I feel like there's ways around this, because there totally are ways around this biologically.
I mean, isn't there like there's a species of geckos that's essentially all the same organism, because they just make more of themselves.
Parthenogenesis. Trees do that as well. So you have a whole glade of trees that's all genetically identical.
Right.
There is an issue with that as far as diversity goes. So most species don't only do that.
Well, and all of like Sheila et al. are lesser than, they're not just,
Yeah.
she's just, spawn them.
She's not cloning herself.
Exactly. She's not
obviously.
cloning herself. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
Unless there's just less of her to go around. You know, like there's less of the magical stuff of her to go into her offspring.
Yeah.
The Muriel problem.
Right. What do Muriel and Ungoliant have in common?
Look, you're the one who said it. Not me.
Right. Okay. Anyway, I brought up Ungoliant not because of her striking similarity to geckos, but rather because she's the other example that we get of like somebody who found something monstrous to mate with to produce her monstrous offspring. And that seems like the obvious category of solution, since I don't think Glaurung is just going to be budding baby dragons off of himself.
Probably not.
I'm gonna assume that
there was another parent involved.
Right. Dragons reproduce sexually, and therefore there's got to be some other. But again, like that's so. Again, hence my comparison to the Ungoliant situation. That there would whatever monstrous creature it was, in which. So if we assume that Morgoth bred in a like Karkaroth-esque breeding campaign, right? Bred and nourished with his own, investing with his own power to make them greater and more monstrous.
One of these baby dragons.
This line of creatures originally, and then invests one of them with a spirit under his allegiance who becomes, and that's Glaurung, right?
All right.
Presumably, there would have been other creatures very like Glaurung before he's invested with the evil spirit, with whom Glaurung could mate and have babies.
Okay.
Presumably.
Yeah. So as far as winged creatures go, we were kind of limited to the original form of the Balrogs and Thuringwethel and her vampires. And that's
and
about...
eagles. Yeah.
And eagles.
Well, I mean, birds,
like
but the eagles being,
The eagles are large.
Eagles
unless there are a few of the monsters of horn and ivory, like
which were
lying around in Morgoth's basement after the War of the Powers.
Whatever Sauron gets for his Nazgul to ride.
But your point, I think, is that the fact that Morgoth did not make Glaurung winged in the first place is hardly surprising, given that that's a very uncommon mode. Yeah. Right. I mean.
Yeah.
Almost all creatures,
past
monsters.
The square cube law is tough, man.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Okay. So.
When I ask who's Grendel's father, David Roberts wants to know.
We have Grendel and Grendel's mother.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have no questions about that. Not only because I don't actually want to probe into the sexual history of Grendel's mom. I have too much sense for that in a couple different ways. Actually, there are several ways in which I don't want to know more about that. But I'm just like, he's like a troll. I mean, like there are creatures that live out there, right?
It's interesting.
He's not unique. Grendel.
It's interesting that they don't call out the sort of thing he is, considering they certainly had the vocabulary to manage that, unless that's part of a later translators.
I mean, they use some vocabulary. Like they call him orc. They call him elf. He's called an elf and an orc, actually. So it's but like the vocabulary that it uses in the Beowulf poem is basically like monstrous / magical quasi-human, right? Of which there's so like giant, troll, ogre, like all of that stuff fits into. I mean the categories are vaguer, in Old English and like Old Norse usage. Descendant of Cain. Yeah, exactly, David. Yes.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
That's the one that
he
I
is certainly a descendant of Cain.
Which that's certainly a Christian addition.
Well, the entire
we're getting into dangerous territory,
fair enough,
about the dating of Beowulf and stuff. I don't go there.
I don't want to date Beowulf.
Yeah, well, neither do I. That's the point. Like, I'm gonna have nothing to do, nothing personal, Beowulf, but I'm not gonna have anything to do with dating Beowulf.
Okay. So the question now is: do we want the wings to just magically appear and surprise have winged dragons in Gondolin? Do we want to do a thing where we show Morgoth singling out one of the dragons at some point, because we're going to see Angband next season with Hurin, so we would have an opportunity to show a dragon getting Morgoth's special attention from the same way Karkaroth did? Or do we want a mad scientist to be grafting wings onto a dragon? I don't know what character in Angband would do that or where they're getting the wings from, but again, if you want an island of Dr. Morothus, you can totally graft wings onto a dragon for no reason.
Yeah.
The problem being that if you're not supposed to have wings because you already have 4 legs and that's how many limbs you get, there's no bone structure to graft them onto. So if you're adding wings, this is a very magical thing.
That's one of the reasons why a lot of people, even though the more ancient people use the words interchangeably, people will use the word wyvern to describe dragons that are winged but without front legs, like the wings are the forelimbs. They look better. They look cooler. They look better, in my opinion.
They look more aerodynamic in any case.
Well, for sure. But the anatomy makes more sense.
Well, yeah, it's like you get into like centaur anatomy. It's a little difficult when it's like, wait a minute, how does the spine work? Spines don't work like that.
Yes.
So if centaur spines don't work, dragons with 4 legs and wings doesn't work.
Right.
Doesn't mean we can't put them in SilmFilm.
Right.
It just means that their skeleton's going to look really weird.
I mean, obviously the question of what we show and how much we show and what we do is to me a different question. I think that we should have at least a vague idea of the answer to this question
of where it's going,
of what's really happening. Because honestly, we almost need to actually know ourselves before we're even qualified to answer the question of what we want to show or not show. Right. So, and since we're talking about baby dragons, we might as well settle it now. Because again, it needs to happen soon-ish in any case. Like it's, and Glaurung, I mean, Glaurung's future in SilmFilm is not indefinite at this point. Right. So again, anyway, so here we are. We're already talking about it. Let's talk about it. So, actual surgical, like, that's ridiculous. Like, no, we're not going to actually have somebody strapping a dragon down on a table and, like, performing surgery and stitching bones onto their skeleton. Like, no, that's ridiculous. A simple magical process in which there's a puff of smoke and then afterwards the dragon has wings is totally unsatisfying because we never see that sort of thing happening. Like that seems to be quite different. If Morgoth could snap his fingers and do that sort of thing, he'd have done it more often, right? Like I can't think so. I think we would need, it's not like we need to develop this figure as a character, but I almost feel like we need what needs to happen.
Proto and Galacon.
Well, the spirit. So it seems to me that the best, Nick, just as you were describing, we already have an idea, right? When a beastly form, even a monstrous beastly form, is invested with, is possessed by an evil spirit like Dor-lómin was, or Tevildo, right? There are physiological changes to the beast, right? This is manifest. This has outward consequences, right? And so therefore it seems to me that the most, given especially that what we're talking about is not Morgoth developing a new thing, but Morgoth innovating a design that's already there. There are already dragons. There's already now a heritage of dragons from Glaurung, the father of dragons. I mean, I make the joke that this is Dragon 2.0, but they're descended from Dragon 1.0, right? They're descended from Glaurung. Still, he's still the father of dragons, not just the original prototype, which we've abandoned and upgraded, right? So Morgoth he's got the dragon concept, but now he wants to make it different. How would he do it? Like, by what mechanism? And I think the answer to that is by the mechanism by which he made Glaurung in the first place, right? If he can invest it with a spirit, if the wings are basically the expression of the particular spirit that gets invested, and I'm here thinking primarily of Encalagon as the number one, he would be our prototype winged dragon, right?
It seems likely given his size.
Right, exactly. And the fact that he's the only named one before we get towards Smaug. Exactly, that's what I mean. Like at this stage, he's the only named one.
Right.
So yes, if we were to imagine some other servant of Morgoth who was, but as you say, Marie, we don't have any winged candidates.
Thuringwethel's vampire bats.
Yes,
basically.
Thuringwethel's vampire bats and the original Balrogs, as you said, were the only. But since the Balrogs fell, they haven't been winged.
No.
So it's not enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was like, if you could somehow have preserved the destroyed wings of the Balrogs and then somehow graft them onto the dragon, well, that seems like a terrible idea all around.
But here's the thing. What if the Balrogs will remember being winged? Right.
Sure.
Their loss of their wings in that wonderful story that we made back in season 1 when we were all much younger is that their deprivation, they were deprived of their wings as a consequence of their actions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the destruction of the lamps.
In the destruction of the lamps. So what if there were Morgoth were to present this as a sort of an opportunity for them to, they cannot just take winged forms anymore. It's like a curse laid upon the Balrogs, right? That they're no longer able to take, to just adopt.
They're locked into the physical form. They can't shapeshift anymore.
Right. But what if what he does, Morgoth, that is force a Balrog spirit into a dragon, and then the Balrog gets its wings again, because wings are connected with that original spirit, and that would prevent us having to invent a new evil winged spirit.
Yeah, and it also prevents us having to breed Balrogs and dragons.
No, I'm not suggesting an actual crossbreeding of the two.
Glaurung is the father of some dragons?
No, he's the father of all the dragons.
Except for this one.
No. Because it's one of his descendants. We got one of his descendants, and then we're going to whammo.
So we
cram a Balrog spirit into it.
Or something. Yeah.
So we lose a Balrog, but we get Encalagon, which is kind of cool.
It's true that Balrogs are a limited resource.
But we don't need them all. And
we don't need them all.
We had some extras, I think. In the sense that we were going to have, obviously, save Durin's Bane for later. And I think we were going to have one extra Balrog just mysteriously survive the War of Wrath and not be accounted for.
Just in
and
case
never
we
be
want
seen
them
again.
later. Yes.
No, like in
Oh,
the
just
just as a dangling loose
Yeah,
end of
as
there's
a
some
loose end, yeah.
unknown Balrog out there.
Yeah.
But we don't, need the dangling end.
Well, because hang on. So we have 9, right?
We
Total?
currently have
Total?
9.
9. Okay, so we have 9 Balrogs. We need.
Yes.
Let's say we'll take out our dangling Balrog, and then we'll take out Durin's Bane.
Yeah.
And now we've got Glorfindel's Balrog, Ecthelion's Balrog. Tuor needs to kill at least one. Which is Gothmog. Right, yeah.
Ecthelion's Balrog is Gothmog.
Is Gothmog, yeah. And then Tuor needs to kill at least one. Right?
You don't kill a Balrog and survive, so I
that's
Tuor
true.
need
He
to
would
kill
break the rule.
He'd be dead.
Okay.
Which would leave you take away the fun of us then having to decide his ultimate fate.
Right. So
we don't want to
we can't kill Tuor. So that leaves us with 4 spare Balrogs.
Yeah. I'm like, did we not have other people who were planning to kill them? I forget.
And
we were gonna probably
say,
kill
and
a few in the War of
then
Wrath.
we only have to kill 3 during the War of Wrath. But then I remembered, no, we'd still kill 4 because the Angalicon still dies.
Right.
And he can have been named Angalicon the entire time.
But yeah, very possible.
Retroactively name him.
Very possible. I mean,
so we have a named Balrog.
It would be
named Ancalagon.
Yes.
And everyone's like, "That's dumb. They just stole the name from the dragon."
Right. Little did you know how dumb it was going to become when we spliced them together. But I mean, I'm trying to think of like what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I think this is
better than poof wings.
It's much better than poof wings, right? I mean, it's the kind of it's the sort of thing that happens, right? That when a spiritual being is forced into the body of a beast creature.
Because the spirit would remember the original body that had the wings.
Yes.
Even though it lost the ability to
And so it's kind of like an end around the wing ban, right?
Yeah.
So okay. I was typing something to someone, so I may have missed you. My guys may have just said this already. So the spirit of the Balrog, who used to be winged, enters the unwinged dragon. But because his spirit is winged,
a naturally winged spirit, correct?
Right.
Yes. He's still, because all of the Balrogs remember their wings. Right, like their lack of wings is like an ever-present
shadow of their wings
torment to them.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a punishment. Right. It's like a curse upon them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
We have indeed lost Balrog. Well, not Balrogs. Yeah, we have indeed lost Balrogs. Some Balrogs were killed in the destruction of the lamps.
Well, there were 10 ice spirits and 10 fire spirits.
Yeah.
So the ice spirits all got destroyed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't remember if it was in the destruction of the lamps or in the war against the powers.
Some
way,
Balrogs
we
were
took
killed
out-
in the destruction of the lamps. I remember that. And one Balrog defected and became the sun.
Aryan,
the 10 of the 10 who were fire spirits who were around. One is Aryan,
but of Balrogs proper, like since they became what we now recognize as Balrogs, we haven't lost any.
Right. Mm-hmm. And no, we did not lose any in the destruction of the lamps. Of the fire spirits.
Right.
They were consumed, but they weren't killed. They lost their wings. They didn't die.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And David, we can totally get some cold drakes later on. Like this
I'm not.
Once we overcome this problem, we can do.
if we could put wings on dragons.
Exactly.
Getting them to breathe cold instead of fire is comparatively.
It's
easy.
more of like an identity issue, like a personal expression, right? Like it's fine.
They absorb stuff from their environment.
That's no problem.
This biology was already crazy. We're gonna get into chemistry now.
Biology, it's dragons.
So but this is the thing. This is why, you see, Marie, we can avoid biology. This is why, if the key here is whatever metaphysical process is involved in this combination of spiritual being and terrestrial creature.
No, that I'm fine with. If we're gonna try and figure out the difference between endothermic and exothermic reactions right now, I'm not gonna be okay with that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That one we can that's certainly a can we can kick down the road. Like we're not going to need cold drakes until like the third age at the latest.
So do we intend then to maintain four-legged winged dragons?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
I'm okay with it. I don't think it looks as good, but
the Balrogs had 4 limbs and wings.
And wings. Yep. I get it.
So
and
if that's the spirit that's supposed to be dictating the shape, then.
And the I don't think, especially within Calagon, I don't think that we can take a step backwards and be like, for dragons to be smaller and more compact winged dragons. Like the whole transition is that they're like greater, bigger, and also can fly. So like it's not, it can't be like they can't look like a pteranodon next to a T-Rex or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it can't be like, but this is the flying species, which is like developed differently. Because again, the only difference is that they're bigger and better. But
747 is not going to have anything on the wingspan of this thing for sure.
No.
I think we figured out that the measurements that were given of Thorondor put him in the jumbo jet range for sure.
Yep, for sure.
But this, I think, is still going to be bigger.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with Calagon is he's supposed to somehow break the peaks of Thangordrim when he falls, and there's like more than one mountain.
Not going to worry about it.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But people are like, so that means he's this big. I'm like, no, we can't have a dragon.
I have to admit that I find it, yes, I find that an actually absurdly literalist reading.
Yes.
Like,
I know.
to imagine that he has to be larger
than
than an entire mountain range, in fact. I
pushed back against Thorondor having the described wingspan. Like, right. I was like, no.
Yes.
No, he does not, in fact.
Right.
No. Anyway, so luckily in episode 9, what we have are some young dragons that we will see in the beginning of the episode, and that will cause concern among the elves.
That's right. And these are as yet unwinged dragons.
Correct.
Because that will happen at a point. This is not a natural evolution of dragons within one generation. So he will... okay, wait. There's still one question we haven't answered. Oh, yes, we did. Glaurung has reproduced sexual. Is there a mommy?
Not that we were planning to show at any point.
Okay.
Presumably, whatever the other parent of these dragons is would be a creature in Dorthonion. So.
Right. And presumably, Glaurung would be a worse father than Ulfang. So,
I mean, he does. He looks after his brood. I'm here to tell you.
Okay, probably a worse husband, however. Okay.
Probably, but I will say, in Glaurung's defense, none of his kids try to kill him.
It's true. Yeah,
you're right.
That we've seen.
I'm convinced. Yeah. Glaurung's family unit is far more functional in every way than Ulfang's family unit. Wow, that's hard. But there it is. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm satisfied. I do think that needs to happen soonish.
I'm okay with next season when we see things in Angband. This season we've seen nothing in Angband.
Yeah.
And very little from the villains. Like, honestly, the scene with the discovery of the young dragons is like
the first behind the scenes. Yeah.
The first villain storyline. We should tell that. I mean, we've seen some skirmishes and attacks. It's not like the villains haven't been doing things, but we have seen so little from their point of view.
And I love that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a deliberate choice, obviously.
For this season, yeah. To that this is all about the good guys laying all of these plans and us having no idea what Morgoth is planning and how he's responding and how much he knows. Even Sauron's independent interventions into the story have been very slight and without any clear sense of his own plan, like hints of kind of what he's attempting to set up over there. But
we'll see more from Sauron in episodes 12 and 13. But yes, as of right now, we don't really know what he was actually
exactly
up to.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So I like that. I like that. Okay. I think the Ulfang. Oh no! One last thing about the A plot before we move on. Speaking of parenting,
Mommy Dragon. There
Mommy
you go.
Dragon. There you go. Okay, excellent. This is one thing I struggled with this one plot element, and that is sort of this next step of the Ulfang's poor parenting. The moment at the end of the episode where we're left with that felt a little strained, because it was Maedhros that they were envious of, and that's really hard. Like, how even Ulfang's own children could see Maedhros as in a
threat to them as his kids.
Right. I mean, again, like, the question is Ulfang himself like an infant next to Maedhros, right? In no way is Maedhros a rival son figure, rival brother figure for them.
No, he's not. Exactly.
The question is just whether he's like the overlord who's even like, is Ulfang himself even worthy of notice by, when I'm like, that's the dynamic, rather it's closer to that than it is to, him loving Maedhros more than he loves them. This idea of rivalry, but I don't know.
So the real rivalry is that the sons, in particular Aldor, would like to be the generals in the army.
Right.
But they're not. Ulfang has his own generals who are older than them and experienced, and he has zero interest in giving his sons that kind of authority because they haven't earned it in his book.
Right.
And so Uldor is now ready to really hate anybody that his dad likes.
Sure. Sure.
And that's more the dynamic. It's not that, like, oh, you like him better than you like me, and therefore I'm sad. But it's if you come back talking great praises about anyone else, how come you're never going to go talk about me like that?
Right. Right.
And that's what so it's not like he really thinks that it's a father-son dynamic between Ulfang and Maedhros on either way, actually. Well, it's just more that Ulfang's respect is hard to earn.
Yeah.
And Uldor feels the sting of that very hard. So here's this elf who doesn't even know his dad. And his dad's coming back like, oh, this elf is great.
Right.
What do I have to do to get that? I will never get whatever that is.
Yep. Yeah. So
apparently I need to be a hundreds of years old elf with tons of experience and do all these amazing things. And then maybe my dad will give me the time of day.
Right. Right.
So it's that weird dynamic.
There are a few things. One other thing that was set up, and again, Alana's reminding me that, of course, this initial script discussion happened before episode 8 was written. So there are some
substantially.
things. Yeah, substantially, right? So there are things which might look different on the other side of that. But if I think about, I try to invest in Uldor's situation, Uldor's perspective. There's several different elements that we can play up, right? One is the whole, like, my father's love and respect and how I never get it and how I've given up ever getting it. The second is coupled very closely to that. Indeed, undoubtedly pathologically linked with that first one, is the desire for him to prove himself that he is a general and leader and everything. Third is the one raised in episode 8 about his desire for holding lands, right? That like, I would think that a part of this, which even if it's not one of the things which serves to drive the wedge deeper between Uldor and Ulfang, would become something that Uldor would latch onto as a way to, as an excuse or even a means of supplanting his father, is to basically say, look, like, why, one could imagine him talking to other leaders in the army and being like, my father is determined to like farm us out to these elves. We came here because the king above kings said that we could, have lands here. Like he promised that we would have land. And now we're here like the piddling servants of these elves. Right.
Right. And it's very important that Uldor have resentment towards the elves.
Yes.
That needs to be clear, because all of his other motives could be like, okay, fair enough. It really is unfortunate that your dad is so harsh on you.
Yes.
But the part where he's like, and these elves, that is not based on anything real.
Right.
That is 100% his viewpoint and needs to be exploited later.
And that brings me back to where I started with this episode, right? That I wonder if Uldor might not be involved more from the beginning.
Okay.
In fact, like a really edgy approach to this episode would have Uldor as the point of view character for all of the A-plot.
We were planning to do that with episode 12.
Okay.
But
anyway, I'm just thinking
I see your point that more Uldor would help to get to something that pays off in that final scene. And since we haven't seen him up to that point, it does feel a little bit like, okay, yeah, he's mad. But like, we don't see why he's mad because we didn't set up all the pieces to get there.
And it would also enable a little bit more development of what I was suggesting at the start, that is of the whole human elf culture thing, right?
Exactly. So
the multiple
Uldor's
perspectives
response to the elves
contrasted with
Ulfang's,
yeah.
And then at the end it comes together, and
yeah.
And Uldor's got a younger brother, Ulfast, as well. So if we need any other viewpoints, like he's available.
Yeah, we have Ulfast, who could perhaps be slightly more moderate, but still on Uldor, closer to Uldor's side than Ulfast's side. As far as this, so like Ulfang is willing to. One of the things about being the person who is always the most competent person in the room is that when you actually meet people who are even more competent than you, assuming you have enough humility to not just be threatened and be, blind with rage and envy of that. But if you have any like security in yourself or humility, you're going to love that, right? Like, I mean, that's going to be a really fun experience for you, to meet other people that you can talk to, right? And other people that you can learn from. Like, oh my goodness. Well, like he was the greatest military leader in the human world, Ulfang was. And now to be like, wow, like there's stuff I can learn. There's people who can teach me things. Like, this is amazing, right?
I remember feeling that way when I discovered the Signum community, because I had people have for years come to me with questions about Tolkien and his work, and I thought I really knew what I was talking about, and then come to understand that no, I in fact do not know very much at all, and I very clearly remember,
it's just like how we all have felt upon meeting Marie.
Right. Yeah. I remember having a conversation with Marie about this very thing. I think.
I'm sorry I ruined it for people.
At a diner in College Park, Maryland. In fact,
yes.
After mid-moon.
Yeah.
Yes.
But no, anyway. So like Ulfang's response in that way is positive, right?
Yes.
But if Uldor and Ulfast are on the other side, they're because again they're all kinds of like, whereas Ulfang is centered and stable, and I mean, like but they're all, because Ulfang's a bad dad, they're all kinds of conflicted and are dealing with all sorts of insecurity issues and envy problems and things. That's their basic foundation. And so in that context, when they then come into contact with the Elvish society, we see a very different kind of reaction. And one which is going to resonate with a bunch of the army, frankly.
Right. So I think there's space in this episode for that. Again, we can have them in the background of certain scenes, or, have them interact with some of the characters as well. I do think we want to keep Ulfang as the point of view character at this point.
Okay.
But he could maybe share some screen time with his sons.
Yeah. So I think that would help. It eases the danger of the end, is that it's not like we want to give Uldor so much time that he becomes this super well-rounded character, right? Like, we don't really have time to invest that much in Uldor.
No.
But I think
giving him some basis for that final scene, instead of just dropping him into the scene and then informing the audience of how he feels about things, would probably be better.
And again, it provides us an opportunity, because we haven't seen even Hondir's negative reaction against the elves wasn't like, that was nothing more than like, I am like completely out of my element and I'm trapped. Right.
Yes.
And I'm really upset that I can't get home to my girlfriend and my parents and, the life that this is not the life I've chosen. This is not what I want.
I'm essentially dead for all intents and purposes.
Yes, exactly. His issues weren't exactly, I am anti-elf, precisely. Right.
Right. He wasn't exactly pro-elf, but that wasn't the problem.
Right. So in this way, the perspective that we can give to Uldor and Ulfast, Uldor perhaps to a greater extent, is really one we have not seen. Like a sheer, pure, superstitious prejudice. Right? It's like, this sorceress came among us, and now we're in the land of sorcerers, and they can never be trusted at all, and my father's been ensorcelled, and whatever. Like, there's got to be people who, a less tame version of what we hear in Rohan. The sorceress of the Golden Wood. Right?
Right.
Even among people who have, culturally speaking, have all kinds of reasons to have relatively positive associations with elves, still slip into that way of thinking. The sorceress of the Golden Wood way of thinking. Even Boromir is like a shade away from that in his discussion of, in his associations with Lothlorien.
Right.
Anyway, point is that whole way of thinking, that the human reaction when being among elves, that just says these are monstrous creatures that look like people, but they're not real people, and
eldritch abominations
who are like, not only can't be trusted, like who's talking about trust, right?
We don't even matter to them at all.
They must we must destroy them or before they destroy us. They are alien, totally alien, and very dangerous.
We got to be a little careful with it, because we don't want to overplay our hand on him.
Agreed. No, I'm not suggesting everything I'm saying. I'm not saying we want to put all that stuff directly into Uldor's mouth. I'm just talking about the characterizing the kind of reaction that we haven't really shown, because there was a risk of that at the beginning. The closest we got was the people who went back over the mountain, right? The people who wanted nothing to do with this. Right. But even the main statement of it was not human. It was the false Umlach, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think we can have, nameless army person have that view. We don't need to put that in Uldor's mouth. And Aldor can just be somewhat sympathetic to, like, yeah, it's crazy we have to work with these guys. Like, he doesn't have to agree that elves are all sorcerers or whatever.
Right.
But having somebody give voice to that's probably not a bad idea.
Because the
Again,
whole army is going to turn against them and slaughter them.
Right. So we need to have some basis for that.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have the Brada character lying around. We have utilized him a little bit.
He's one of Ulfang's generals, so he has like a line.
Yeah. So he's got a line in episode 8, and I think he has a slightly bigger role in episode 11.
I missed him in episode 8.
Was it in episode 8? Am I remembering that wrong?
We talked about putting him in there. I thought he was in there.
I might have.
We definitely said, well, I might remember it without it having actually made it into the script.
Or I might have missed it because I read the script quickly. So one way or the other.
There was generals that Ulfang was giving directions to. I believe one of them was intended to be Brada.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Cool. No, I mean, he needs to be around.
Yeah.
So
but the point is, his position is one of Ulfang's generals.
Right. Makes sense.
And,
Makes sense. I mean, in a relatively short amount of time, he is going to become the leader of a whole area.
Right.
You know.
Right. So he's the general who survives, clearly.
Right.
But we'll see him again in episode 12. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, he can be in this one as well.
Okay.
Like I said, I think there's space in these scenes for multiple characters, even if we're like, oh, the core of it is that, Ulfang needs to learn this, or these people need to discuss that. There's space to create a scene around it that includes more Easterlings.
Right. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have one big question with Doriath.
Sure.
Okay.
So this was bothering me when I was thinking through the outline. Thingol. I refuse to even talk to the Feanorians is defensible.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, isolationism within a Beleriand context is increasingly hard to justify. It's always been a little bit hard to justify. Like, we've always kind of had to go with, like, well, thanks to the Girdle of Melian, my people aren't at threat, so I don't care. And that's not good, right? I mean, that's already a borderline indefensible position to have. Isolationism can be defended when it's like when the entering into conflict, so I'm thinking here, for instance, of like the U.S. before World War II, like at the beginning of World War II, right? When you can try to convince yourself that it's genuinely irrelevant, right? Like, here's America and North America, like, this is a Europe problem. Why should we go over to Europe and involve ourselves in their affairs? It doesn't involve us. We're staying home, right? I'm not saying that's a great argument, but it's a defensible argument because you can say it's not our business. Thingol can't say this is not his business.
That nonsense last time.
Right. Well, and then there's the whole World War I thing. But Thingol, there is no basis for Thingol to say this doesn't involve Doriath at all. Like, Morgoth, irrelevant to Doriath. Orcs invading Beleriand doesn't matter to us. Other elves suffering, like, he's like on the non-kinslaying platform, right? Like, and yet, like, to what extent can you continue to say, I'm gonna cheerfully sit here and let all of the rest of the elves be slaughtered and still, like, feel that you're maintaining the high ground against even the fan? Do you see what I mean? Like, it's just, it's difficult to so the reason that this episode really brought this to mind is that it was one thing to have Beleg and Mablung at the summit, right? Where they're like, look, Thingol is not going to work with the Feanorians. Like, that's a non-starter. We can't even, we barely even talk to him about this, right? Come on now, be reasonable. But it's a different thing for a conversation in Thingol's court to be happening when Galadriel comes in and she's like, look, this is the thing, it's happening, right? Like, she probably, right, has this sense of like, this is a thing that has been put in motion, right? Like, I was guided. Now's the time. I was guided to these Easterlings, right? This is a eucatastrophe. Like, this is happening. This is obviously the right thing to do. I get that you have issues with the Feanorians, but this is not about you and this is not about them, right? This is, because it truly is the best chance the elves will have, as far as they can see, the best chance the elves will ever have to defeat Morgoth. And if he doesn't get defeated, at the very least, everyone else, even if you believe that the Girdle of Melian will stand forever and neither Morgoth nor any of his servants will ever be able to enter Doriath, to say, for that reason, I don't care what happens in the rest of Beleriand, is to be almost as much of a jerk as the Kinslayers themselves. And it's just, I'm trying to like, how do we describe Thingol's state? This is one of those things that, like, it's really easy in the context of a story like the Silmarillion, just to say, and Thingol wasn't willing to go and move on. To be fair,
one of the reasons why it feels more justified in the book is because right before he's asked to join the Union of Maedhros, Thingol gets a strongly worded letter
right
that he has not in fact gotten in our adaptation. I'm just saying,
demanding the Silmaril.
Right. Yeah. So there's certainly a degree of we have created part of this problem. Part of the dilemma. It's the dilemma is simple. Though another thing, and I think Sharon's right. She says it's impossible to have Melian be disconnected as well. Yeah, like the Girdle of Melian is not just a force of nature, right?
Okay. Right. So speaking of Melian,
there's
a good chance that Melian knows that the Union of Maedhros is not headed anywhere good.
Yeah.
And she's probably not going to say that, but she could say something along the lines of, yeah, we don't need to be part of this one. Like, this isn't where it's at. And if we have her say that on screen, that would be a pretty significant puncturing of the balloon of any kind of hope that this is going anywhere good. So we can't have her say that. But she could have said it privately to Thingol. So if Thingol's like, well, we are not doing this, we can say,
so the solution to the problem is to have him make a portentous but vague declaration, like him just to say, we're not doing this, and then be like, but sire, and he's like, I'm sorry, not expressing like bigotry and prejudice and trying to make active, but simply saying, no, we can't, we won't.
Also, there's a non-zero amount of, this is the Mother of Dragons, that's David Pirtle, who just noticed my background,
revealed here tonight.
So there's a non-zero, I don't want to lose anyone else component, possibly. Like, there could be a legitimate fear of losing a bunch of his people.
Sure.
To the point where, like, he is not going to order them to their deaths. Like, he's willing to let some of them go if they really feel like joining the Flying Tigers, right? But
so, I mean, we do have him in this episode making that concession. Beleg and Mabung can go, and if others want to go, they can.
Yes.
Right. And we expanded it from, in the book, it's just them.
Just the two.
We expanded it to, you can bring
a squad or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. No, I like that.
But definitely it's not the army marching out.
No.
So the reason, let me explain one step more, the reason why I feel this is like what, not only why when I was thinking about this, I'm like, that's really hard to construct. It's really hard to construct if Thingol is not yet like, we don't want him to be that far down the drain yet. I mean, he had his moment already like he already had the one local low point when he imprisoned his daughter, right? That was not a good look, right?
No.
That was a local low for his character, but we had him recover from that. Like
Yes.
and we have yet to see Thingol in one of the most positive lights in which he's ever portrayed by Tolkien, which is as foster father to Turin.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's a break between the two scenes that we get in Doriath, and it might be okay for us to indicate that Thingol goes into consultation with Melian, and when he comes back, like, we don't get what was said.
An explanation. Yeah.
Right. But he's just like, no.
Yeah.
You know, like,
we cannot. And they're like, but sire, and he's like, I understand, I get it, but no.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, just a nod to the maybe he actually listened to Melian for
occasionally.
once.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
would
go ahead.
Would be helpful.
It would be.
Just the whole, again, that you're not trying to destroy his character in this decision. And yes, he can have valid fears about his people getting killed if they go off, but if Finduilas is like, oh no, Gwyndor, if you go, this will all be a disaster. Like, how does Melian not know that? Like, she's got to know this is not ending well.
So
it's not worth it to send them out.
So let's go one step further. Not that we'll show this or talk about this in the episode, but let's go one step further. What does Melian know? What would she tell him? If she...
That this is not going to lead to the defeat of Morgoth. It's not going to work.
I certainly would not expect her to construct it that way, because that's not strictly true. This does lead to the defeat of Morgoth, just not directly.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. If so, there are. If she does, and I'm not saying she necessarily has to, have some concrete sense of what's coming, of how Morgoth is going to be, like, basically, if her message could be not one of merely despair, right? Like, so I happen to know this is going to be a complete disaster and we want no part of it. I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is that this is going to be like a complete disaster. That's one possibility, but I don't love that. What I kind of like better is for her to have some sense of, like, okay, so Morgoth is going to go down, but this is not the moment. I have a sense of what that moment's going to look like, but it isn't this.
Will have no further hand in the defeat of Morgoth.
Well, except the Silmaril is still in Thingol's court.
Yeah, but that doesn't get us there.
It doesn't, but we do need the Silmaril for Arendelle to do its thing.
Right, but they already have it. Like, they've already done the thing that they're going to do.
Right.
I agree. But it's also true that as soon as Thingol named the Silmaril, she's like, oh.
Yes.
Okay, then.
Right.
Like, she knows where that all heads. So she knows that
exactly
the destruction of Doriath is tied up in the Silmaril, which is already there. Like, she can't save Doriath.
And that's part of the problem that I was having too, is that there's no way Melian could possibly get behind a line of reasoning which just says, oh, but we're safe behind the girdle. Nothing bad is ever going to happen. She's already said, like, okay, King, Doriath is screwed now. Congratulations, right? She's told him that. Like, she knows that Doriath is definitely not inviolate and will, like, bad things are definitely going to come to Doriath. She's already foreseen that. So it's not like, there's no way she's going to sit around and be like, oh yes, let's just pursue this essentially blindly optimistic as well as totally callous isolationist policy. Like, her getting behind that, and not only getting behind it, but being in a sense the instrument of it, right, through the girdle would just be weird, right? So if she,
unless her thing is essentially, look, Doriath must be a place of safety for a time, you know, like, and marching out will not accomplish that, or something to that effect, you know, like to kind of pursue the Nargothrond route?
Because, so Doriath is going to essentially contribute Elwing to the equation.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So it's not fair to say that Doriath is going to play no role, because Elwing is going to be involved. But okay.
But that's not exactly Doriath.
Well, no, I mean it's part of the post Doriath situation, but no. Anyway, okay. Here's the thing that not thinking about the future of Doriath, because as Marie and I were chatting before session anyway, we have no idea what's going to happen in Doriath in so many ways. Tolkien didn't have any idea. Anyway, whatever. But like that's not a conversation for another day.
Decisions to make later.
Exactly. What I'm thinking is, what if we imagine, and we don't have to, but for a moment, what if we imagine she has some kind of sense, perhaps vague, of what it is that's going to bring about the fall of Morgoth? She could be foreseeing one of a few different things. One is, we're not going to do the Turgon thing, right? Did we decide against that? The if Turgon, like, the message that, what's the message Olmo's going to send to Turgon in our version?
That we already did it with Fingolfin.
We already did it with Fingolfin.
I would say,
yeah, because we decided not to do it with Turgon. Right.
I think because at the time it was decided that doing it with Turgon would be too difficult.
Yes.
And so therefore doing it with Fingolfin solved the imaginary problems that were being seen there.
Because it really is a proto story problem. Anyway, I promise I won't digress long. But there may be some people who having the faintest idea what we're talking about right now, because we're being a little bit elusive. And that is simply that in the Book of Lost Tales, the message that Tuor brings to Turgon, there's the prophecy that Turgon is going to be the one to bring about the fall of Morgoth, and that Olmo is going to give him the green light. And when Olmo gives Turgon the green light, he is supposed to attack. And when he attacks, Olmo will deliver the Valar to come in on his side, and Morgoth will fall. That's the prophecy. This, by the way, is the explanation for that, in its current context, weird little moment in the published Silmarillion when we're told that Morgoth got really uncomfortable whenever Turgon came by. That is derived from this earlier concept that Tolkien had. And so the message that Tuor brings to Turgon is, almost says, green light, set out from Doriath and attack. And that's what Turgon decides not to do. So anyway, that's the Turgon story that we're alluding to, that we kind of gave to Fingolfin because we decided not to do that and have the prophetic, focus all of the prophetic deliverance concept, not around Turgon, but simply around Eärendil.
Right.
So what might be really interesting, and again, these words would have to now come out of Thingol's mouth after his conversation with Melian. Yeah. But if he used a little star imagery, like Doriath's star, will rise later. Will rise when it is needed most, but it is not now. And that prefigures the line from Huor, right? And is also true.
Right.
Not in battle.
I'd almost like it if we could have some kind of bird reference, but anyway, I'm thinking about Elwing.
Right. Yeah.
But him just as Huor is anticipating Eärendil, to have Melian and Thingol anticipating Elwing specifically. But Ilana is right that one way or another, Valinor has to be involved if Morgoth is going to be defeated. And she says, I have to believe that Melian has a sense of that. And that would be enough itself for her to say, this ain't going to work.
It's not time
this
yet.
is not it. Right.
Okay.
Yes. But so yeah, that's true. And if that's coupled with some sort of, and it can be vague, it can be some sort of vague vision that she has had.
But a reference to the West and about their hope coming from there and how this is not that is probably enough to explain why Thingol is just not on board.
I do like the idea for him to offer, because like Beleg and Mablung, who haven't heard this, are going to be like, dude, like, why are we letting everybody else die? Like, how can we just stand by and let everybody else die? And so I like that your notion there, Nick, of having him say an analog to Huor's thing, right?
Yeah.
To give some kind of like, that's a little bit more encouraging to say,
Yes.
like, we're not just letting everybody die. It's just that now isn't the time. Now isn't the time. The time will come. There is and that, I think, if he conveys to them something
The sheltering
like
wings of Doriath will rise when they're needed most.
right, yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure.
There's got to be something. There's something in that metaphor that we could use,
right,
for sure.
Right. Doriath will take flight, David Roberts suggests, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so something along those lines, so that, which not only says, don't worry, we're going to help, we're going to contribute. It's just that now is not the time, but also to be essentially adding like the implication that like, this is
the West.
This is the wisdom of Melian, and that will resonate with them to be like, okay, Melian says it's not just we need to do nothing now and let everybody die. We need to wait for the right time. Yeah. That would solve my problem of how we prevent Thingol from being just utterly, it's way too soon for Thingol to be utterly like indefensible and we can't just have him look horrible.
He certainly needs to have his pride injured first.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna get worse, but and also we do need to show a descent specifically related to his obsession with the Silmaril, right? Which is going to ultimately, presumably, lead to his death.
Celeborn's probably the person, because he and Galadriel have a conversation immediately prior to him delivering his decision. And Celeborn seems like the only person who could and would say something about that.
Right.
Beleg and Mablung are not going to talk like that.
No,
certainly not now.
If we need anybody to talk back to Thingol, it's Celeborn, clearly.
Yeah. Well, it's Melian.
Well,
but
that's not even about talking back. That's just talking. Right. It's Thingol who talks back to her.
Need somebody to say, if we need one of Thingol's people to say something negative about Thingol, it's going to be Celeborn.
Yeah, agreed. That's his job. Yeah.
Respectfully, of course.
Of course. Yeah. No, that's his. Because everybody respects Celeborn. See, I didn't even laugh when I said that. Like, I made it all the way through saying that without laughing. No, that fixes the problem. Okay, that only leaves us with the thing I didn't want to talk about, which is the death of Lilith and the plague striking Dor-lómin, the sad part. My biggest question, here is, where was Gondor when everybody started dying in Dor-lómin? Sorry. No, but like,
why are the elves
not helping? Yes.
We could see that they've been shown as being spectacularly not great at handling sickness,
human stuff.
Right. So it wouldn't surprise me. It surprised me to see them not doing very much.
But like a plague, like a serious.
Yeah, to see them in the background acting is probably enough to address the kind of concern that you're, because surely it would, if there's no elvish intervention at all, it could seem like they were just kind of left to.
Yeah, that was my only concern, because I would think that anybody would be imagining, like that viewers would be thinking, like, where were the elves? Why did they not help? Why Hurin and Morrowind and all of the people have been these faithful, allies of the elves.
Yeah.
And the elves are
in their time of crisis. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
in their
so
time of crisis, when they're having this human problem, which doesn't affect the elves, and the elves are just like ignoring it. I mean,
yeah. So having elves like nursing them is probably the move. We don't necessarily have to draw a lot of attention to it, because we've done a lot of work to indicate that, like, the elves don't have any, at least at this point, they don't have any particular insights as to how to help humans.
it might be worth, and again, I know the script isn't written, but it might be worth having a scene with an elf who's trying to help and who's just like, we know nothing about disease. Like, I don't even know where to start. Like, how do we? Yeah.
One elf who's available, who's not part of the war preparations, would be Annual.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he could be in this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good call.
Except he is kind of persona non grata with the other elves, so that
Which
might
is a good reason.
suggest that he's doing this kind of against the culture.
Right, which does not go back to answering the question of what did Friggin do when all his subjects got sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So maybe not just him, but
yeah.
Right. But elves who can't get sick are the perfect people that you want, like, fetching hot water for your sick people.
Right.
And,
right. So the people of Dor-lómin do not have any understanding of germ theory and don't know how this is spreading or what's causing it or any of that. So the idea that, well, the elves can't get sick so they can do it makes sense, but it's not like they would know whether or not the elves are like carrying the illness with them.
Right. Well, and it, we went out of our way to make sure that there were multiple ways that you can interpret where this sickness is coming from. Like, obviously they think that
Morgoth sent it.
That Morgoth sent it, and that's what's in the Silmarillion, and we're not saying that that's not what happened.
Right.
Yeah, we have a
we're
conversation
also saying
on screen
don't
where they
get your
do
kids
say
a
that's
cat.
what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And you know what else I love about this? Again, what I love about the idea of having elves who are attempting ineffectively to help there is that it's a really interesting contrast to what's going on the other side. Right? Where you've got the really competent Ulfang hanging out with the super competent elves, and there's the whole, like, the humans are at the kiddie table with the elves who can do anything and are all wise. And then we're juxtaposing that with elves being completely helpless to handle this human situation, namely disease, right? So Ulfang is not going to be exposed to the weakness of the elves, right? To the failure of the elves. The limitations of the elves. But our audience is we would be showing that, right? So that would be a really interesting way to, because it's always, I think, a temptation. I see many people who respond to Tolkien by thinking that, like, well, elves are just like completely awesome in every way, and they're like the super people, and it's. There's a lot of that. Like, that's true. They are superior to humans in many different ways, but it is not simply the master race and the lesser race.
I think it's easier to have that reading in Lord of the Rings than in the Silmarillion.
I agree.
So I can understand someone who has met Elrond and Galadriel being like, well, elves are kind of amazing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And clearly
Or like the
can
gods
do
who
no
dwell
wrong.
among us. Yes.
Right,
Yes.
right. But yeah, having encountered all the Silmarillion elves, I don't think people would be as tempted to
Right.
that viewpoint.
Right. No, not in the same way. But anyway, it's I think it
I mean, they're awesome, just clearly flawed.
clearly flawed. Agreed. But yes, the way of presenting them, we're not just having the human elf interactions that we have, and as Alana says very rightly, the whole season has turned into a fascinating exploration of humans and elves. You know, there's so many different ways to explore this theme that we see, and that's exactly the thing that was striking me most, as I said at the beginning, about this whole episode. And and to make sure that we are showing that in a way which is to me the big, I agree with you, Marie, that it's harder to come away with like elves are just all awesome all the time after you read the Silmarillion. They're certainly flawed. The thing though that I find that like totally changes the perspective is the Athrobeth.
Well, yeah.
You know, and where we get this more clear, like, okay, this is not just the first comers and the followers, right? This is like two peoples who are both trying to understand each other and both recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of their like metaphysical situations, right? And all that kind of thing. So I think, and the idea of, as Alana says, they're both children of Iluvatar, right? Trying to understand how the other one works. That's one of the things that I think that we can really show in this episode, both by showing Ulfang's interaction with the elves out in the east, and then the elves' vain attempt to assist the humans out in the west. David, that's interesting. David Pirtle says elves aren't better; they're just more. That's an interesting way to think about it. I like that. I totally agree with the impulse. You know, with the idea of Hurin and Morwyn's coming together through their mourning. I liked that. We've had a lot of really positive growth of Hurin and Morwyn's relationship. That the death of Lilith would be something which makes the connection between the two of them even more personal and more intimate. This other experience that they have shared together, and that has so little to do with the political situation and the leadership situation and all those other things that they've been juggling at the same time that they've been getting to know each other better and growing closer in their marriage. The like personal behind closed doors, like vulnerability of that seemed to me a very, it's even as far as they've come in their marriage, I think investing even more in Morwyn's personal grief for the loss of her husband, which is something that gets very submerged in the Aftermath Turin story, right?
She's got too much to do.
Yes, submerged beneath, I've got to take care of my son and baby daughter. I've got to try to hold, you know, whatever can be held together. And this, we don't
make sure that none of the Easterlings are interested in taking me as their new wife instead of
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As Alana says, this is essentially the place we leave them before the battle. It's the way they are with each other at the point where they parted. And I agree that's what I liked about this, to have the final note essentially of their relationship be one of like purely personal affection and emotional bond, basically. I thought was a really good move.
Yeah, the beginning of their marriage lacked
Yes.
a good deal of like intimacy.
Yes.
They were pretty much contractually agreeing to get married.
Yes.
But there was nothing there. And so to end them on this note,
well, other than sexual attraction on his part. Right.
I wouldn't exactly classify that as intimacy.
Well, no. I'm just saying, you said there was nothing else apart from politics. There was that too.
Well,
but anyway,
okay.
no.
He did
I agree
notice she was pretty.
Yes.
I
Yes.
agree. Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, it was a partnership that could barely be described as romantic or a real relationship or any of that. And so to see them at this point where they're struck with a crisis that was something that came on very suddenly, unexpected, nothing you could prepare for, and not an easy thing to go through, obviously, to lose a child, and to then have to lean on each other to get through it. It made sense that if you go through that in that way and aren't like blaming each other and hating each other for it, then you've clearly got there. Like you have built a relationship that is real and is intimate and is loving. Right. Even if none of that was there in the beginning, they got there.
Right.
So I thought they earned that moment.
No, I loved it. I was glad we came to the B plot last, because apart from my elf medicine questions, I was I really loved the whole direction of that. I just had a funny idea. We won't talk about it much, but it's Alana's fault. I'll blame Alana. She was just saying there's a lot to explore with Morwen next season, and I totally agree. It's going to be really interesting. And that inspired me to say, it would be interesting? It would be interesting to go through the entire Turin story and never have Turin be the point of view character. Always to be looking at Turin from the outside.
So in Game of Thrones, the way the books are written is you see all the scenes from a very particular point of view, and there's certain characters that are carrying those storylines.
Yes.
And one character that you don't get the point of view of is Robb Stark.
Right.
You only see
his mom
his
mostly
through his
is where you
mother's.
get him.
Yeah. So you get Catelyn Stark's viewpoint, but not his. And that was a unique choice to tell that story, because obviously his mom's very proud of him and thinks he's great. So you're getting a very rosy view of him.
Right.
But it was also really clear from that choice that Robb Stark was never going to do anything. He was never going to be anybody.
Right.
Because he wasn't a point of view character.
Right.
So I feel like
it made you question his longevity because he was never.
Well, not even that, but just what is he going to accomplish? Like he's clearly not going to go anywhere. And yes, because Game of Thrones also is longevity, but
right. Yeah.
You're muted, Nick. But
I found myself liking Robb Stark, which is what clued me in that he was going to die.
Fair enough. But
anybody that I was like, oh wow, this guy's actually pretty cool in this mess of horrible, awful people.
Certain death.
Oh, that means they're going to die.
Yeah.
But where I'm going with that is that with Turin, he's already cursed and doomed, and clearly things aren't working out well. So if we don't see his point of view ever, I think that might lead to if the audience is too removed from him. I don't know if that's how we want to tell that story.
Me neither.
It would be hard to make him likable.
Right.
I think if
Robb Stark is because it's his mom who likes him very much.
Yes.
We're seeing.
Do we want to?
You like Turin?
I do.
Yeah. No, and I'm not saying we want to lead people to hate him, but is telling his point of view sympathetically the goal?
To a point, yes.
I think so. I think that without some sympathy for Turin, there's a reading of Turin where he causes all his own problems, and he's just a jerk from start to finish.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of I feel like the text invites us to look at his story with a certain amount of but for the grace of God go I. who's isn't it is it the Joker who's like, we're all one bad day away from someone's just one bad day away from being me, or something to the the effect.
Ilana's pointing out Finduilis likes him, Morwen likes him, Beleg likes him, Nienor likes him. I mean, it would be,
some would say too much,
arguably, but it would actually not be hard to choose characters who are maximally sympathetic to Turin, from which to tell his story from beginning to end. So
that is possible.
Nellis. I want a Nellis POV episode.
Well, that's fair. I do think we want Nellis's point of view.
Yeah. No, I mean, Turin is surrounded by people who admire him and love him. Thingol likes him. Yeah, exactly. Orodreth likes him. I mean, everybody likes Turin. Who doesn't like Turin? Androg?
Cyros.
Cyros, okay, right, yeah. There's a list, but it's shorter than the list of people who like him. Broda, right? I know, like there are some people who don't like him, but
Orodreth.
Even Mim likes him, as Jeremy says.
I'm not sure Orodreth does dislike him entirely.
No, I don't think Orodreth dislikes him. Orodreth likes him.
Dislikes him is a strong word, but I would also say likes him is a strong word.
Sure.
For how
Orodreth
feels about
Orodreth
him.
trusts him. Well,
yeah,
we'll have to see.
It can't be entirely antagonistic, or it wouldn't work out the way it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've kind of already talked about that, about Orodreth being kind of an anti-Valinorian impulse extremist.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We'll sort of. Anyway, obviously we don't have to write the whole Turin story tonight, but it is just.
Good.
All right, we'll put that suggestion on the table and see if we can work it in.
We'll see. Not saying we have to adopt it as a rule or anything, but it would be it would be an interesting way. Nick, even exactly as you were saying, like there are different ways you can read Turin's character, right? Kind of preserving that in some way by never actually showing what he thinks or precisely why he makes the decisions he makes. If we see it from the outside and are never inside his head and don't get him explaining it, right?
Well, we do. I mean, in film, you don't
you don't really get
that
inside
anyway,
people's
so,
heads.
yeah,
I know it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't. But wouldn't it be just? I think it'd be fun. I think about like shifting, like one episode is from Beleg's perspective, and the next episode is from Gwindor's perspective, right? And you could work, man. There's almost no time when there isn't somebody available to show us. It'd be interesting. Yeah. We could make the final episode from Turin's point of view, like his death episode from his point of view.
Because that's the part where there's not a lot of other people around.
Right.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, he's got Gerthang.
From the sword's point of view. Oh yeah. Oh, winner. Gerthang likes him.
I mean,
Gerthang does not like.
Gerthang does not like him. I know.
Gerthang, I think, likes blood.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, I just okay. I'm totally digressing now, but I just thought it was interesting.
How did you feel about the alternate potential delivery system for the plague?
The cat. So I don't think I fully picked up on it in the outline. I mean, in keeping with the general, cats are agents of evil sub theme in Tolkien, it seemed to work.
I thought you might enjoy that personally.
Yeah.
And the reason it's not super explicit is because we're not actually
saying
trying to say that
that's what happened.
The plague is just a natural disease, and when you have a large group of people move over the mountains, they might bring illness with them, and that illness might spread, possibly through things like fleas, which could be carried by cats. But we're not saying that didn't happen either.
Right.
But it's just to have that as a backdrop and an available alternative explanation that doesn't have to be true.
Is like Hurin gonna kill the cat at the
No,
end of the
because
episode?
he has no idea.
He has no idea.
Hurin
Okay.
is going to go kill Morgoth
Well, you're right. Right.
because
He thinks.
Morgoth just killed his daughter.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Duh.
No. Well, Horin is all in on this Morgoth did
Morgoth's
this.
breath. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the clouds from Angband are the accepted cause of the illness.
Right.
It just, the people of Dor-lómin were particularly susceptible. So while there was a little bit of illness in the Easterling camp, apparently the people in Dor-lómin had no
Yeah.
immunity to whatever it was.
Right. Right.
So like,
Yeah.
we do have illness in the East as well, just it's not
Not as
the
much.
story.
Yeah. The Ulfang's army is not being, like, decimated by the.
No.
Right. Yeah. I don't fully see how it would travel to Dor-lómin from.
So
Was there a messenger?
It's not made clear in the way that we wrote the scene 2. Horin and Gilear come back from a meeting with Fingin in Mithrim. Gilear gives Turin a cat he got from the visiting dignitaries. Those visiting dignitaries being Easterlings.
Gotcha.
So that's
David Roberts says, he has an idea. When Turin gets back to Dor-lómin after Nargothrond, his family house is just like completely full of cats.
A little cat sanctuary.
It's completely overrun, and like because the Easterlings won't go near it, right? The Easterlings won't go near it, so it's just full of cats. It's like
abandoned and full of cats.
abandoned and full of cats, right? That's funny. That's funny.
That's one of my favorite MCU insults to someone is I think it's Bruce Banner says of Loki that guy's brain is full of cats.
Full of cats. Yes, that's right.
Crazier than a bag of cats.
Crazier than a bag of cats. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yes. Yes. Anyway, I that's a funny idea. Okay. All right. So we've already gone super late tonight, so I think that's probably enough of solving all of the metaphysical problems of the late First Age and also planning the next few seasons. So I think we've done enough here tonight. This is what happens when we don't have a script.
I was about to say, moral of the story is we need to give you a script to discuss.
Exactly. Yeah. Clearly.
Working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next session is tentatively planned for the 30th, unless we move it to the 6th of February.
I think we were going to try and move it to the 6th.
Okay. So yes, that is this slide is already out of date. It's okay. No, this was a very recent change that we were planning. Yeah. We're gonna plan to have the next session on the 6th of February. Will be our so 3 weeks from tonight will be our next session.
And we'll try to close the casting nominations by the end of January as well.
Yeah. So don't forget to go and contribute ideas
and nominate some nominees.
Nominate some nominees. Exactly. We need a Beldis. We need a we need Hundir. We need all kinds of people.
I went over the casting. I occasionally show my wife the casting nominees because she takes more of an interest in people who are in Hollywood than I do. And when I told her that Morwen is supposed to be the most beautiful human woman ever, she was not impressed. So we have some work to do, people.
It's challenging. Morwen is a really challenging casting.
Honestly, more challenging than Luthien, because you could just pick a talented and beautiful actress for Luthien. She doesn't have to have that same forbidding quality that we want to.
There are some particular qualities that Morwen
and
has
that's
to have.
really hard to find in a young Hollywood starlet, it turns out.
Yeah, it's true. Like Morwen can't just have this like cute cherubic face. Like there's no way. Like that's not. Okay.
Maureen O'Hara. Sharon recommends. Unfortunately, she's dead.
Well, you know.
That's against our rules.
It's against
Yes.
our rules. We
They
set
must
that
be
rule a while
alive.
ago.
They must have an IMDb page, and they can't have been cast in SilmFilm already, which eliminates about 150 people.
Yeah, and as the years go by, for several reasons, these rules are going to be harder and harder to abide by. there may come a time. There may come a time when, yeah. But anyway.
But it is not this day.
It is not this day. All right. In any case, casting suggestions. Don't forget casting suggestions. All right. Thank you, everybody. We will see you guys again in 3 weeks. Thanks for listening, and Godspeed.